All right, strategy number 2, ongoing evangelism of the software solution by power users and the support team. So why is this important? Well, first, let me explain what I mean by evangelism. Evangelism is the act of continually promoting the positive impact a product has on an organization. The reason it's important is because it serves to remind people of the value of the software. Evangelism done well can reframe how people think about the solution that you've put in place. It is the antidote for negativity. So, how do you make this happen? One way to do this is by referring back to how you want to create opportunities to talk explicitly about the benefits of the organization that the organization reaps from having the software. And one way to do this is by referring back to how things were before you implemented the software. For example, switching to re-enrolling digitally with Veracross is a great example. The change from paper to digital was a huge time saver and represents a shift in the culture of the organization. I often remind people of what it was like before we did this, just to help them get perspective. And so how do we do this? Well, this can be done in meetings and in email communications. It can take the form of a celebration, an announcement, or a reminder. The intent and focus need to be clear to everyone.
And Tim, just a follow-up question for you, and I'm curious if Whitby has done this. Getting perspective can be really hard, and especially if you're only speaking with folks within your institution. Have you ever leveraged power users at peer or aspirational institutions to say, hey, what are some of your successes that I can share with my team?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ways to do that, Keith. An example that pertains to Veracross is a Google group that exists with peer schools that are using Veracross. And I will often encourage my colleagues to become a member of that closed Google group for Veracross so they can read and ask questions and get feedback from other schools. Luckily, in the state of Connecticut, where Whitby School is, there is a great organization we have CASE, the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools, and as part of that, there's a committee for tech directors, and the feedback that we get from each other is also very helpful. So there's a lot of opportunities for folks in other departments to refer to similar kinds of organizations like the technology group that exists here in Connecticut. So you can evangelize software in different ways, a subtle way or a more explicit way. When you evangelize software in a more subtle way by deliberately incorporating the language into conversations with employees that highlights the benefits of the software, even when the focus of the conversation is on something else. So a subtle example of this is when you just in the course of a conversation with a colleague, after you've explained something to them or after you've both witnessed the use of something or impressed by something, to make a comment like, this is why I love X. A more explicit example, of course, is when you're helping a colleague and they're clearly frustrated or challenged, by saying things to them like, you can use X to do that, or why don't you use X to do that? Or I'm pleased to report that X now does that. Someone in a support role needs to be constantly using sentences like this as reminders to colleagues of the solutions that are in place to make their lives easier. All right, a few tips for strategy number 2. First, always acknowledge the caveats of the solution, the product that you've put in place, so people know that you're sincere and objective. Be prepared to counter why the software was selected as opposed to a competing product that may have a reputation as being best in class. Folks that come, new hires that come from other organizations that are using a given software may have experience using a software that was truly best in class, but it only does one thing for the organization. And so at some point historically, when you opted to use the software you're using, maybe it was chosen because it does multiple things for the organization. If a software vendor has newsletters, webinars, or a blog, then you'll want to reshare that content with your colleagues.
And Tim, if I can jump in here, one of the things that we've experienced at Veracross is when you talk to people outside the technology department, they may not even know what software they use. If you ask them, what do you use for processing applications? They may go, I don't know. I'm not sure. Talk to my technology department. Do you curate information from vendors? So if it is a new feature or a webinar or a blog, do you ever take that and say, hey, Jane, I want to make sure that you're aware this relates to your job. This relates to tangibly relates to what you're doing. Take a look at this. Do you help curate resources
All the
like that?
time, all
Yeah.
the time. So if I get, for example, with Veracross, if I get the newsletter that comes out announcing stuff that's coming up or stuff that's been released, I will always forward that, especially if there are articles in that newsletter that pertain to given functional areas. I will forward that to those functional areas. In addition, if there are product releases for different software that we use here, and I get those, I will often forward those as well. So everyone's in the loop about how the product is moving forward and trying to adapt to changing times. I think that's a key part of my role, is letting everyone know. And I actually, I see that as being multifunctional, which is interesting. One part of that is letting folks know that that this company is constantly trying to improve their product to make your lives easier, to make it more effective. But the other side of that is letting folks know that when there's a problem with the product, it's because a company is constantly working on the product, and problems should be expected. So it helps manage expectations. We can't have both. We can't have a company always trying to improve something for us, but not be willing to have patience when that product has a problem, because that's how software, the industry, that's the direction the software industry is moving. And so it actually is multifunctional for me, very intentional for me to be forwarding stuff like this.
And I'll just add one last comment before we move on. And I know, because Tim, I know you do this, and that is to make sure that you highlight the actual benefit of the thing and not the feature itself. I think software companies can tend to be overly technical in explanations of new things that are coming out or new, but hey, this is why it matters to you, Jane. This is how it can make your job better and more efficient.
Yeah, I like as often as possible to provide use cases for folks. So and I just did this last week when I sent an email to the whole staff about a feature of Zoom that I happen to be using right now in this recording, which is I didn't know existed, where you can just share a portion of your screen. I thought that was amazing. And so I sent an email to all the staff saying, hey, Zoom has a feature that might be helpful for you. Here's what it is. Here's how to use it. And here's the use case. If you're giving a presentation, for example, and you have notes in the notes field, but you don't want those to display in the presentation, you can use this portion of the screen feature in Zoom. So absolutely, I think that's a great point. All right, so that is the end of strategy number 2. Here's a quick review. Strategy number 2 is ongoing evangelism of the software solution by power users and the support team. The why is because evangelism reminds people of the value of the software. And the how is to create opportunities to talk explicitly about the benefits the organization reaps from having the software.